different.
You better turn the gain down a little bit right now since I'm right here.
But I know she's been wondering.
Okay, we got a pretty good thing there. All right.
That was a lot of good conversation. You don't have anything else to talk about? No, I didn't have that to talk about.
Looks like we're slim tonight. All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like our numbers are down tonight. We had a little more last week, but I guess we will continue forth.
You hit start, right?
I did hit start.
Okay.
Is it not working?
It says waiting still.
I hit go live. Am I not supposed to hit go live? Is it not? I hit go live. It says live.
Oh, it's good. It's working now.
Okay. All right. So those who aren't here are going to not get the homework assignment and get an F next week. I'm just kidding. All right. Who was able to see the homework assignment on Facebook? Did y'all see the public?
Can we lie?
Huh?
Can we lie?
Okay. I forgot to mention it Wednesday night, and I only told a few people. I put it on our private Facebook page, the private one, not the public one. But if you didn't get it, that's okay. Tonight, I will remember to give out the assignment. So, but we'll go ahead and talk about this one anyways, because this one is interesting. Now, the one we're about to look at, there's more to it. I'm only going to talk about one aspect of it. The other aspect of it kind of gives you a headache because there's so much math involved. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to hurt your head. I'm going to do just at least one aspect of this alleged contradiction, just to show that there's a possible answer. So, I'll read Genesis chapter 15 and verse 13. Kevin, do you mind reading Exodus 12 and verse 40 after I read this one, please? Okay, so Genesis 15:13, God says to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. So, does anybody know the context of this verse? What land is he talking about?
Where they would be in bondage?
Yeah.
Egypt.
Yeah, Egypt. Yeah, you can see in verse 14, I'll judge that nation. They'll come out with many possessions. So obviously he's talking about Egypt. They're going to be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. All right, Kevin, if you could read Exodus chapter 12 and verse 40.
Now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years.
All right, so I'm going to play skeptic on you. Genesis 15:30 said they would live in Egypt for 400 years. That's a prophecy, right? It's a prophecy. God says 400 years to Abraham. But then you've got Moses saying that they were in Egypt 430 years. So now we've got a missing 30 years here. Now, either God can't predict, or he was off, or Moses is uninspired and can't really figure out how many years they were there, or they're both contradicting one another, or is there a different answer?
Well, I didn't know what the homework was, but there is a footnote, and I don't know if this is applicable or not, just footnote under verse 40 that says that this is the time frame that they were in Egypt and Canaan.
Mm-hmm. That's actually
From the time of the promise.
yeah. That's a little bit of it. Yeah, that's actually one of the answers that we can look at is they were in Canaan around that area for an extra 30 years. Also, if you look at verse 13. I think there's another good possible answer we could look at here. We looked at one before. I think we looked at it in an actual sermon, so we didn't talk about it. But I talked about it in a sermon. Do y'all remember the one about the plague that happened in Numbers that It said, I'm forgetting the number. I think it said there fell 24,000. Paul, quoting from that, says there fell in one day 23,000. Remember we talked about what was the phrase that shows us that that's not a contradiction?
About,
Well,
Just one day.
one day, there you go. One day. Paul says there fell in one day 23,000. Moses gives us the overall number 24,000. So that explains the missing 1,000. So here we've got several answers, just as Kevin mentioned. That's a good possibility. There is a key phrase in chapter 15 and verse 13 that's different from Exodus chapter 12 and verse 40. So, you look at two pictures and you say, what's the difference? This is kind of what we're going to do with this text. Again, I'll read Exodus 12 and verse 40, and I want you to listen to a difference between Genesis 15 and Exodus 12. So Exodus chapter 12 and verse 40 again, get this. Now the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. All right, Genesis 15:13. Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years.
Yeah, that's one of the things I found, that they were enslaved for 400 years, but they lived in Egypt 30 years before they were enslaved.
There you go, very good. Yes, this mentions slaved and oppressed. Again, does Exodus 12:40 say anything about that?
Mm-mm.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't mention it at all. This gives us the actual details. So it's a lot like 1 Corinthians chapter 10, where Paul says there fell in one day 23,000, but Moses. That's interesting. Does the Old Testament record how many fell in one day? And that's kind of neat. How would Paul know that? Inspiration. I'm getting off subject. So for y'all that just came in, we're looking at this alleged numerical contradiction. This is the homework I forgot to give. So you get an A because I failed as a teacher. This says they would quote unquote be in Egypt 400 years. That says they were in Egypt 430 years. But we just looked at Genesis 15:13. There's a difference in this passage. It says they would be slaved and oppressed 400 years. That says they lived there 430. So as Barbara just pointed out, they probably lived there 400 years, or they lived there 30 years before they started getting oppressed, and so a total of 430 years. So the 30 years is how long they lived there, probably without being slaved and oppressed. In fact, in Exodus chapter 1, as they sojourned into Egypt, Joseph and his family, Israel and his family, it says in Exodus chapter 1, let's see.
11.
Yeah, verse 11. So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. But if you back up, it says, Joseph died and all his brothers, this is verse 6, and all that generation. But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. Nowhere in this text says, and so years later, they started getting enslaved and oppressed. It doesn't tell you, so we don't know how long they were there. This is probably the answer. Is there any way to disprove this? No. So there you have a possible answer. Now, I would encourage you to go to Apologetics Press and look up this. All you have to do is go on their search bar and put 430 years, and you'll find it. It gets even more complicated than this, but my brain is too tired, so I'm just kidding. And we've got a lot to cover. But at least in this aspect of it, that gives us the answer for the missing 30 years.
well, Stephen, in his speech in Acts chapter 7, verse 6, he mentioned the 400 years also.
Mm-hmm.
But then over in Galatians, Paul mentioned the 430 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this coming all the way over into the New Testament by inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so it's like it's giving us information. Yeah, very good. All right, any questions about this? This all make sense? Yeah. All right, so let's move on now to the, I think we've covered some numerical contradictions. We've covered some geographical. Last week, if you missed it, the last week's is now available on YouTube for public view. I accidentally set it to private, like a doofus. So it's now public. We talked about ethical alleged contradictions, and that was a really good discussion. So now we're going to move on to chronological contradictions. This has to do with chronology, the order of events. For those of you who are like me and sometimes don't know what words mean. Alleged chronological contradictions. Now this one I'd never seen before until very recently, so this one's quite interesting. If somebody will read Matthew chapter 4, 5 through 10. Whoever wants to read that, if you'll read that one for us. And then if somebody wants to read for us Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 12, this has to do, this has to do with the temptations of Jesus. So whoever wants to read the first one, Matthew 4, 5 through 10.
Then the devil took him up into the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, He shall give His angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. Jesus said to them, It is written again, You shall not tempt the Lord your God. Again the devil took him up to the exceedingly high mountain, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, All these things I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, Away with you, Satan, for it is written, You shall worship the Lord your God, and Him only shall you serve.
Okay, so hold your place here in Matthew 4, because we're going to come right back to it. Now, whoever can read Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 12.
And the devil, taking him up on a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, All this authority I will give you, and their glory, for this has been delivered to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you will worship before me, all will be yours. And Jesus answered and said to him, Get behind me, Satan, for it is written, You shall worship the Lord your God, and Him only shall you serve. Then he brought him to Jerusalem, and set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, He shall give His angels charge over you to keep you. And in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. And Jesus answered and said to him, It has been said, You shall not tempt the Lord your God.
Okay, all right, so I want to write this down really quick. I'm just I'm labeling these temptations as, okay. So in Matthew 4, the chronological order, he says that first he did the bread temptation, turn these stones into bread. Then Matthew says, then he said, worship me. And then he says, jump. And he quotes from the Psalm. Luke flip-flops number 2 and 3 and switches the two. And now he says, jump. And then he says, worship me. So, according to skeptics, Matthew and Luke can't figure out which order that Jesus was tempted in. Now, the details are all the same. All the details, I mean, they match identically. But the order is off, according to skeptics.
That's just like you and I telling recounting something that happened.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to tell it one way, and I might tell it another way. We're going to get all the facts the same,
Mm-hmm.
but there could be a difference in the order or something.
That's very good.
I mean, that to me is
Yeah.
pretty weak.
It's kind of weak, yeah, it's really lame.
Yeah.
You'll notice there are a lot of them, some of them a little tough. These, like the one about God killing the children, that's tough, that's hard. These though, it's like that, is that all you got? Yeah. So, there are actually some key phrases in here that help us on why they did it. First of all, you need to know this. Luke most likely writes the life of Jesus and the things he did in order. Because he writes in Luke chapter 1, I'm about to sound contradictory here, but I'll explain why I'm not. Luke in verse 3 of Luke 1 says, I'm going to write these things out to you in consecutive order. So the events that happened in Jesus' life and the things that happened, he says, I'm writing in consecutive order. Now, however, we go to Matthew chapter 4. And there is a key phrase in Matthew chapter 4 where Jesus says this. Let me look at my notes here and make sure. That's Mark's notes. Okay. Notice Matthew says in verse 5 and verse 8, then the devil took him into a holy city. Verse number 8, again the devil took him to a very high mountain. He says then and again. Now those are chronological words, aren't they? Then and again. Luke, notice the difference in Luke chapter 4. Now again, I'm about to sound contradictory, but I'll explain why it's not. Luke chapter 4, verse number 5, and, now two different Greek words here even, and he led him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world. Verse number 9, and he led him to Jerusalem. And is not a chronological word, is it? I mean, it's not usually. It kind of can be anything. So, Matthew most likely then, since he's saying then and again, is chronological. He's telling us what happened in order. Now you say, wait a minute, I thought Luke wrote things in consecutive order. Most likely Luke wrote the overall events that happened in Jesus' life in order. Just the broad things. The specific little details, like the order of the temptations, no, he didn't write those in order. He wrote the temptations, the verse number 14, the returning to Galilee. Verse number 38, he got up and left the synagogue. He calls his disciples in Luke 5. Those overall events, yes, all of that is in chronological order. But he's not concerned about chronology in these specific little things. And again, just what he said, me and you could be telling one different story, but talk about it in different order, and it'd be okay. Let me give you an example here. Let's say there are two witnesses of a murder. Murder started off as a robbery, but it ends up a murder as well. And two witnesses are interviewed. Only two people see this. Witness number 1 says, the murderer approached the woman, and he shot her, and he took her money, and he ran away. Witness number 2, the murderer approached the woman, then he took her money, then he shot her, then he ran away. Now notice I'm using the word then there. I shot her and took her money are reversed in both of these. But witness number 2, using then, what is he doing? Chronological, yeah. Witness number 1, he's just telling you what happened. He doesn't know the order of things. He doesn't have to. Now, does that mean, when we say, well, that means Luke's not inspired? No, you wouldn't look at a witness and say, wait a minute, you said this, and you must be lying, because a police officer wouldn't do that. First of all, it doesn't matter in what order these things happen anyways, does it? I mean, a police officer wouldn't be concerned about that. So we know these men aren't lying when they claim inspiration and write things out of different order. Again, Matthew most likely is writing this in chronological order because he uses the words again and then. But Luke, again, just kind of uses the word and there. Does that make sense? Very good. Clear as mud? Okay. All right. Let's move on now. There's so many types of contradictions that I want to mostly do one for each type, since there are I only thought there were 12, and it's up to 14 now, so, each week, I'm like, oh, there's another type, oh, there's another type, so, by the end of this quarter, there'll be 5,000. I like to multiply things. Genealogical. I'm just gonna say that.
That's the hardest word.
That is a hard word, like, yeah. Okay. Genealogy. There we go. All right, let's look at Matthew chapter 1. All right. You guys believe Jesus is the Son of God, correct?
Yes.
You believe he rose from the dead?
Yes.
If I could prove that his genealogy can't be trusted, if I can prove it and show you proof that we can't really tell where Jesus came from, and would it be harder to believe that he rose from the dead if we don't even know where he came from? Yeah, well, maybe. We'll see. We'll see. Look at Matthew 1:17. I'm playing skeptic with you, by the way. If you do the math of Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16, generations are mentioned. And there are 41 generations. You can't deny that. If you count, like you start off with Abraham in verse 2, and then go add Isaac, then add Jacob, then add Judah, Perez, Hezron, and you go on, that's 41 men. However, in Matthew chapter 1, in verse 17, he says, so all the generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. Now, any math nerds in here know what the total of that is? 42. Uh-oh. Where's the one? Where's that one generation that's lacking? They don't know how. Matthew just apparently stinks at math. A tax collector of all kinds of people can't even do math. He can't even math, bro, as we say in the cool world. I don't know if we say that. Anyways, Matthew, everybody's like shaking their head like, no, we don't. No, I'm just kidding. How do we explain this?
Would one, and I just have some footnotes from a sermon or something, I'm just going to throw this out there. Would one possibility be that because Tamar and Rahab were not Israelites, that they would not be included as a generation, possibly?
Let's see. Let's look at that. Let's see. Verse number 5. There's Rahab
women, so they
mentioned.
might not be considered a generation or something.
Probably. I mean, as far as her being a Gentile and all that, yes. But as far as the generations, what Matthew is doing is counting the men of the generations. The women are just who the sons came from, but the math there is the men.
Okay.
So, I think there are, yeah. So we're going to have to go a little more than that. There is the answer, I think, in verse 17. I think verse 17 gives us the extra one person. Again, Matthew adds an extra generation. But Matthew mentions a certain person twice when he's doing the 14. Who's that person that's counted twice in each 14 generations?
It's David.
David. So from generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14. So he adds David twice. Now why? I can't really 12 you. I can't write and talk. I can't talk and whine at the same time. Okay. He adds David twice. Why? I don't know. I can't prove this. But let's say, for instance, you need to memorize this as a Jew. I mean, wasn't this kind of important to memorize as a Jew? The genealogies and stuff? That was kind of important. Let's say the number is 14, 13, 14. Would that have been as easy, even for us today, to memorize as 14, 14, 14? Is 14, 14, 14 easier to memorize than 14, 13, 14? Because you got the same number. There's no difference. So maybe he did it for memorization purposes. Also, the math is right. If you're counting David in this, the math is 42. So there's really no contradiction there. Some people say also he mentions David twice because he was such an important character in the Bible and to the Jews.
And I just did a really quick skim of an Apologetics Press article, and they mentioned that one reason can be since he focuses so much on Jesus being the king in Matthew and the kingdom and stuff, he emphasizes that he came from David and counts David twice.
Very good. Yeah, Matthew is.
Miss that he's for David.
Yeah, Matthew screams the kingdom of God. Like that's one of the themes of Matthew is the kingdom because it was written to who? What nation mainly? Israel. Yeah. So that's good. Does that make sense? Yeah. I don't see why. I could see now. This one is a little more sensible as a contradiction than the one we just looked at. That's easy. But this one, that makes sense once you look at it, right? I mean, a skeptic makes this seem like this is a contradiction. And what a lot of them do, I'm going to mention this in my sermon Sunday night, they spit out these things, but they don't give you all the details. They don't give you all the facts. Like earlier about the number of years they were in Israel, they're not going to tell you that 400 years was how long they were enslaved and oppressed. They're just going to use the words lived and not expect you to actually look at it. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to actually look at it. A lot of kids, they'll get to college, professor will hit them with these things. They've not been trained to look. They've not been brought up. Kimberly was actually raised on apologeticspress.com, being prepared for this kind of stuff. And that's how we should raise our kids, to be ready for this stuff. So, yeah, this stuff's easy once you start doing it. All right, so I'm preaching there for a minute. I'll get off my pulpit. All right, back to the class.
I wouldn't say it's easy.
Easy-ish. Yeah.
But it can be found.
Yeah, it's easier than the skeptic makes it out to be. That's probably, the skeptic makes it like, that's just so you can't answer that. And what happens is the kids haven't been trained to answer these things. They haven't been trained to look. And they all of a sudden start thinking, well, if I can't answer this, maybe the skeptic's right. Maybe I should just leave the church. And then all of a sudden, and this stuff actually happens. There's reports of this all over. So, it's good to pay attention. All right, so let's move on to this one. There are alleged prophetical contradictions, prophecies, specifically in this case about Jesus. Now this one I think you'll answer. If you can prove that the prophecies of Jesus are wrong, now I'm being objective here, if you can actually prove it, that those prophecies are false, would Jesus really be trustworthy?
Yeah, you have a problem then.
Yeah, I would say, hey, if the prophecies are off, then I can't trust who Jesus is. All right, so these are really important because these have to do with our Messiah. There's one of them in Isaiah 53 and verse 5. Isaiah 53.
Oh, is this?
Yeah, this one's dumb. This one is dumb too. But then again, people do buy into things like this because they've not been trained to think about it. They've been trained where they can't even think to themselves, oh, that's dumb. That's, it's sad. Apologetics are so important. So Isaiah 53, this is probably the most famous, at least one of the most famous prophecies of Jesus Christ. It's really cool that he talks about this. When he talks about the suffering servant, does he talk about it in present tense or past tense? Like verse 7, he was oppressed. He was afflicted. Past tense, right? As if it's already happened. That's stuff like that. Now, I'm surprised the skeptic hasn't attacked that yet. They haven't, I don't know if they've even attacked that. If I were going to be a skeptic, I would go for that one, not for this one, because what we're going to look at is just dumb. Verse 7. All right. So Jesus says, or it says of Jesus in verse 7, he was oppressed and he was afflicted. Yet, he did not open his mouth. Question. When Jesus was on the cross, did he not say, Father, forgive them for they know not what they're doing? Did he open his mouth?
Yes.
Didn't Jesus tell the thief on the cross, this day you'll be with me in paradise? Yeah.
Yes.
Did not, when they were coming up to arrest him in Mark chapter, Mark chapter 4, I think it is, or Mark 14, even during one of the times he was actually being oppressed, where is it? Yeah, verse 61, but he kept silent and did not answer. This was to one about this, verse 60. Again, the high priest was questioning him and saying to him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And he said, I am. And you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. So, if Isaiah says Jesus wouldn't open his mouth, and he did, according to the skeptic, we have got a severe problem. Because either, you know the law of excluded middle, right? I'm gonna use logic against you Christians. The law of excluded middle says one thing is either A or it is B. And there's no middle ground. It's either that or that. Either he did open his mouth or he didn't. So did he or didn't he?
You did.
He did. But I thought he said he wouldn't.
Well, but when you look at Mark 14, verse 60, he's asked the first time by the high priest, and Jesus didn't say anything. He says, you answered nothing. And verse 61 says he kept silent and answered nothing.
Okay.
And then after he asked him that the second time is when he does answer.
So we're on the right track.
But he didn't open his mouth to rebuke them or to refute anything that they said.
Right, exactly.
I don't like your answers. You're gonna almost persuaded me to not be a skeptic. All right, so we're getting on the right track here. Anybody know what Hebrew idioms are? Idioms, not idiots. Idioms. Was that live? I'm just kidding. No. Hebrew. Those were the Pharisees. Anyways, so bad joke, tough crowd. Okay, Isaiah chapter 53. There are such things called Hebrew idioms. You need to know this because the Bible uses these all over the place. They are basically figures of speech. If I say it's raining cats and dogs, am I literal?
I hope not.
Yeah, I know, I hope not. Especially if people are allergic, it'd be terrible. Part of that's true, right? It's raining, that's true. But I'm using some hyperbole or some just figure of speech saying it's raining cats and dogs. I don't know where that comes from, but anyways. There is a phrase in the Bible called opened their mouth or opened his mouth that's called an idiom. It's a phrase. And usually, it means open his mouth for a specific reason. Again, we already just looked at Luke or Mark, where Jesus didn't open his mouth to rebuke them or to complain against what's being. Did he ever complain about what's being done to him? No. In fact, he asked God to forgive him. He never rebuked them. He never said, "No, stop! What are you doing?" Right, like a lamb that is led to a slaughter, right? Or like a sheep that's silent before it shears. It's not complaining about what's being done to it. Maybe the lamb opens its mouth just to make a noise, possibly. But he didn't open his mouth to complain. He didn't open his mouth to rebuke. This phrase is used in this way. In fact, if you look at Judges chapter 11 and verse 35, Judges 11 and verse 35. We have plenty of time here, so I'm going to have you all read a few passages. If somebody wants to read Judges 11, 35, Acts chapter 8 and verse 35, it's convenient, Acts 8, 35, and Acts 10, verse 34. All right, whoever's got Judges 11:35, if you'll read that for us, please.
And it came to pass when he saw her that he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me. For I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it.
Okay, so in Hebrew, it's literally, I have opened my mouth. In fact, that's what the New King James says. That I've opened, what, do you have the New King James?
Yeah, it's footnoted as literally opened my mouth.
Okay, yeah, it's the same phrase that's found in Isaiah 53. So, what did Jephthah open his mouth to do before he sees his daughter walk in the door? He made a what?
Made a vow.
Made a vow. Made a vow. So he opened his mouth for a specific reason, to vow. Had he opened his mouth before that, probably? Yeah, I'm saying. All right, somebody read Acts 8 in verse 35, please.
Then Philip opened his mouth and beginning at the scripture, preached Jesus to him.
Let me ask you this. Hadn't Philip opened his mouth to ask him to understand us what they'll read us prior to this?
Yep.
Technically, yeah. So in this case, he opened his mouth to what?
Preach
Preach Jesus. Very good. All right, and this one's similar. Whoever's got Acts 10:34.
Then Peter opened his mouth and said, In truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality.
Okay, so he opened his mouth to, similar to what Philip did, he what?
He's speaking.
Speaking. Preaching, yeah, speaking. We could say, in this case, the Gentiles. Forgive my very neat writing. I'm training to be a doctor. All right, so these are used in very specific ways. He opened his mouth to vow. He opened his mouth to preach Jesus, although he did open his mouth prior to that, but this specific case was to preach Jesus. Peter obviously met Ananias before that and said things to him before, but this was like a figure of speech about something important's coming, or this is very, very purposeful. Does that make any sense? So yes, Jesus opened his mouth to forgive, right, on the cross. He opened his mouth to save, right? He saved the thief on the cross. He opened his mouth to confess who he was, right? He did confess he was the Christ, the Son of the living God. Some people say he never did. In that case, he did. He opened his mouth to do those things, but he never opened his mouth to defend himself. He was there for a reason, right? What's the point? If that's the will of God and that's your plan, he wanted to be there. He did and didn't, he didn't want to be there for what was going to happen to him, but he wanted to be there for our sake. So, idioms are so easy, even idiots can get it. So, there you go. Very good. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So those are pretty easy once you look at them. I mean, again, like Philip said, this comes right at you. It's kind of tough, but once you start looking at it, it gets easier. And again, if the skeptic can prove these prophecies are bad, that's a severe problem. So, all right. So we opened up a little bit of time. Are there any questions or comments about any of these kinds of things?
No, but I read the thing on Apologetic Press about the 400 and 430 years, and I got a headache.
It's
very...
I had someone simplify. I don't have to find my notes. We might even look at that sometime next week, and see what we can do. But it's not that bad once you start having someone simplify it for you.
Yeah, I wasn't that smart to simplify it.
I did a skim read, and I got the 430-year one.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically, it was like 430 years from the time the promise was made to Abraham to the Exodus. Because they were wandering around and stuff before that, they were living in tents. So it was like 215 years or so until they actually went into Egypt, and another 215 while they were actually in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Because you look at it, there's not that many generations. 430 years would be a really long time.
Yeah.
So basically, it just includes their time wandering around in Canaan beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good.
Go ahead.
That's what we was speaking there earlier about from Abraham to the entrance, it was 215 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said that they spent 215 years in Egypt, which made it 430. But that does not jive with what Stephen spoke, when he said they were in Egypt for 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
From what I got from the article as well, I'm pulling all of this from the article, it was sort of a poor translation of the original text, but it was basically like they would be afflicted, the descendants of Isaac and stuff would be afflicted for 400 years, and it's kind of referencing how Isaac is afflicted by Ishmael, and they're going through all of this stuff. They would be going through some kind of persecution until they come to the promised land again.
Yeah, went back to when Isaac was 5 years old, he said, and weaned
Yeah.
his mother,
And that would be about
and Ishmael
400
mocked
years.
him.
Because Isaac wasn't, the weaning of Isaac would be 30 years after that promise was made to Abraham,
Yeah.
and it ended up being 400 years.
Yeah, that's good. We're gonna do a.
That was a lot of math.
My math is not gonna work right now. I'm just over here like, what? No. Yeah, that's good. I thought of a miscellaneous one we can do since we have some extra time here, and then I'll give you the assignment for next week. Let's go to Genesis chapter 22. I think I might have done this in the sermon, so if you paid attention, you're good to go. I'm just kidding. I don't even know if I did this in the sermon now that I think about it, so who knows what happened. Who knows what's going to happen. This might get wild. I'm just kidding. James chapter 1.
James?
Oh, sorry. That's the next passage. But, sorry, yeah. I'm thinking out loud. That's dangerous. Genesis chapter 22. All right. Does anyone have a King James version? You have a, okay. I'm a skeptic. I don't want you guys to read other translations. I just want you to read the King James version because I don't want you to even come close to believing in the Lord. Okay. You, in your only authorized version of Scripture, if you can read Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1, please.
And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am.
Uh-oh. Okay, so God tempted, and again, that's the authorized version. That's the one Jesus preached from. That's a joke. Okay. God tempted Abraham. I heard a guy say he could correct the Greek with the King James Version. Ain't that crazy? Wait a minute. Okay. James chapter 1, verses 13. Somebody read that for us, please. Now you can read any translation you want to in this one. I don't want you to read Genesis 22:1 in another translation. Somebody read James 1:13.
Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone.
So now, God tempted Abraham. God doesn't tempt. We're in a big jam here. Because we're going to talk about ones that have to do with God's nature. This is just kind of, I couldn't think of any other ones tonight, so that's why I'm doing this one. I underprepared, I guess.
Well, the unauthorized New King James says tested Abraham.
Oh man, why do you have to bring why do you have to bring your New King James? Yeah, now see, a skeptic, they don't want you to think about other translations. Just like Kevin mentioned, this says God tested. Now this word is used in 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse Let's see. Where are we? Where is it? Let me find it. Yes, verse 39. First Samuel. This word that's used in Genesis 22 for quote unquote tempted, it can mean tested, just like he brought up. It says, this is in the context of David and his armor before he fights Goliath. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not yet tested them. So, obviously, David here was trying to entice the armor to sin, right? He was saying, hey, come on, yeah, you know you want to sin. Well, no. He was testing it. He was seeing if it would stand the test, right? Did God entice Abraham to sin in Genesis 22? No, he wasn't enticing him to sin. In fact, did God ever intend for Abraham to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice? Was that God's intentions? No. This was a test to see how far would you go for me? Would you be willing to give up your only son? Now, Abraham knew something that Genesis 22 doesn't tell us, according to the New Testament, and he knew he would be raised from the dead. Because since he was the son of promise, Abraham said to himself, because of the New Testament, I know he'll rise again from the dead. So I don't know what God's doing here, but I trust in him. That's what I want to do. That's what God was wanting him to go through, to really see his faith. So God had no intentions for this.
Is that the same word that is used in Matthew 4 about the temptations of Jesus?
No, in
So
one sense.
He was tempted by the devil, or was he tested by the devil?
He was tempted, and tempted and tested could mean two different things, but it also could mean, it depends on what you mean by it. So like, this word tempted in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1, let me pull up my Strong's dictionary here, because I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1, where are you? Here it is. Okay. It could mean, let me see where it's used. Actually, as a matter of fact, everywhere else in Scripture it's used as tested. I'm pretty sure it's called NASA. Let me type in tempt. Wow. It's actually not used in the Old Testament, the word tempt. So yeah, the word is used in Matthew, tempt. No, I would say no, because this one is Hebrew and this one is Greek. And I don't think, let me make sure I'm telling you the right thing here. Because you know how some New Testament Greek words are actually linked to the Hebrew? Like the word Yesuas is linked to Yeshua, which is Joseph or Joshua or Jesus as we know it. But I don't think Matthew 4 and verse 1, yeah, it's not linked to any Hebrew word. So those are two different words. That's more accurately translated as tested. Tempt is more, I'm going to try to get you to sin. Tested is more, I'm going to see what you'll do in this situation. I want to see you pass. Did God want to see Abraham fail or pass? He wanted to see him pass, yeah. So, yeah, that's what that is. God never entices anyone to sin. Does he allow people to be enticed to sin? Does he allow it? Yeah, he allows it. But he is not the source of it. He is not the direct source of it. In one sense, he's responsible for it in that he lets it happen. But he's not responsible for it in the sense that he actually causes it to happen. It doesn't come from him. But in Genesis 22, that's why it's good to look at other translations, because they offer more details and better wording sometimes. Although sometimes King James is better. It's just good to have all these translations before you. So does that make sense? That makes sense? Clear as brick? Okay, very good. Let's see. Now let's talk about next week's assignment. Now that I'm actually here. How are we doing, bud? I forgot to ask about comments. Is there any? Okay. I usually say that in the beginning of class and I kind of forgot. So for next week, we've already talked about chronological ones. And next week, we're going to talk about ones that have to do with the creation account. So I'm going to kind of blend the two together. And I want you to go home and work on this one yourself. Again, no cheating. And what I mean by cheating, you can't look up Apologetics Press. You can't look up commentary. I want you to use that God-given brain. And in Genesis 1, 24 through 31, and Genesis chapter 2, 7 through 19. In Genesis 1, he records animals, then man. That's the order of creation. Genesis 2, he says man, then animals. And so that has to do with creation. If you could prove that creational facts are off, that kind of just defeats not only Christianity, but the existence of, or the trustworthiness of the Bible. But there is an answer to it, and that's what you're going to take home and work on. So, again, how do we explain this alleged contradiction? This has to do not only with chronology, but this also has to do with the creation. So what we're going to do next week is we'll discuss our answers together, and then we will transition into other ones in the creation account. If I'm not mistaken, there's a handful of them. I think about 10. We'll only talk about 1 or 2. So as far as anything else that we've covered, I know we're finishing up a bit early here. Is there anything else that you all want to talk about or questions? Any comments? All right, very good. Well, I think that's going to be a night for us. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
I like this new board.
I forgot you said no cheating, and I cheated, I guess, because
Oh, get her. All right, get her out of
I'm
here.
confessing. Yeah.
You're in trouble now.
My brain is not
Yeah,
that
you just went
smart.
from an A to an F.
I mean, in the real world, you're going to have
Kept my mouth
time.
shut, you know.
In the real world, you're going to have time to look up stuff. But there are those times when you can't have access to anything. You got to kind of use your own brain. It's not fun. Because I try that and it's dangerous.
Yeah. We grew up without internet.
Oh, you think about the old days. They didn't have internet. You couldn't look up
No.
Apologetics Press.
No, we didn't have any of that.
How would you answer those back then?
Yeah.
Using the old brain.
There probably weren't as many atheists back then either, maybe.
I don't know how it works. I mean, I know there were, like, even in God's, the Bible times, but I think it's maybe worse.
Yeah.
Statistically, it's worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably didn't hear. The
It's
one
not as
we heard
bad.
most about was the lady that took, what was her name, took prayer out of school.
Bill was telling me there's what is it, the Gen Z? That generation?
Oh, yeah.
That's becoming very, what did he say? It's a good thing. Like the next generation is becoming very,
They're more
Questioning more.
more what?
They're more question. Oh, I'm sorry.
The question, yeah, they're more about testing stuff and really like,
And they also tend to care more about different things than millennials did.
yeah,
They're
they're actually
the-
caring about truth and stuff like that more. So that's good.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, John Lennox I was telling you about, there was this professor I watched, and he was talking about how he was raised, and he was raised to question stuff, like just to buy in, like what his mom and dad taught him about Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, don't just believe this stuff. We want you to actually, like, make sure you know what you know. And I'm like, that's good.
That
That's
is
really
good.
All right. Very good. Well, nobody is walking out of here an atheist. I failed again.
No, none of us.
Let's end.